and welcome back to my channel. I hope I look okay on camera, because I'm not really like seeing anyone at the moment, and I'm not really doing anything. I haven't really washed my face or anything today, so I hope I look alright, because I'm not wearing makeup. I don't wear makeup really anyway, but I haven't really sorted my face out, but I hope it looks alright on camera. You know. I'm sort of pretty much wearing the same clothes most days as well, because it's just easier. I do change my clothes and stuff, but I don't know. It's just easier. I'm not seeing anyone at the moment, so anyway, I want to carry on reviewing this book, Autism, carrying on from last week. So there's quite a lot I want to say about this book. So I got up in my last video. I got up to the bit where I was like talking about executive functioning, which is something that I'm trying to find out a bit more about, because I think it's something that affects me quite a lot, and probably it's one of the reasons why I'm held back, alongside obviously other things. But I do find organising myself, doing things like quite a struggle. So that's where I finished off last time when I was talking about that. And then on page 42, the book starts talking about female autism. And over the years, there's been a lot of reiteration about autism being more prevalent in males than females, and that clinicians have become conditioned to diagnose boys more than girls. There's a question though, to what extent is this to do with masking? The idea that maybe autistic girls and women mask or cover up their autism more than males, and that might be why they're flying under the radar, because their presentation is less, say, obvious or stereotypical. But conversely, it might be more to do with what clinicians are expecting to see, because clinicians don't expect to see autism in females. They did actually do a study where they presented to, I think it was, I can't remember if it's teachers or clinicians, it might have been teachers actually. They presented a list of like behaviours that an autistic person might display, and all they did was change the gender. So when they put that it was a boy doing these behaviours, the teachers thought, oh, that's autism. But when they described girls as doing exactly the same behaviours, and all they did was change the gender to female, then the teachers were a lot less likely to attribute the same behaviours to autism, and kind of gave alternative explanations like, oh, she's shy or lacking in confidence or something like that, which I thought was quite interesting. And I actually personally am rather sceptical of the idea that autistic girls and women always by default mask more than boys. There might be a slight increase in that, because obviously like we are exposed to societal influences, you know. But I think many autistics, by being autistic, we might actually be less susceptible when we're young to these influences, because we do tend to be like doing more of anything anyway, and there tends to be more like gender fluidity amongst autistic people anyway as well. I know that when I was a child, I wasn't really thinking along gender lines. I was thinking, oh, I'm a girl, so I need to be all nice and quiet because I'm female. That didn't come into my head at all. Now, obviously, it's possible that this did occur kind of on a more subconscious level, but I didn't mask as a kid at all. I didn't mask. And my autism still wasn't picked up, even though I was displaying really obvious autistic signs. But if you look back in retrospect, it's quite surprising, actually, that they didn't put two and two together, because it was all there, all of the signs. They only had to ask my parents more to get the full picture, and it would have come together. But obviously, because I was really bad at maths, and I wasn't like, I guess, the sort of stereotype, you know, I wasn't male, I wasn't interested in trains or any of this more like geeky stuff, I think that might have explained it. And also, of course, like, you know, we're back in the 90s, it was the autistic Middle Ages, really. There wasn't really much knowledge out there or understanding of the more nuanced expressions of autism. But yeah, I'm sceptical as to how far it's masking. I think it's probably more likely to be clinicians just not expecting it to see it in females. I would actually tend to go more with that line, which actually in a sense puts the element of responsibility more on the shoulders of teachers and clinicians as opposed to the autistic person from asking. I would say that actually we need to remove the burden from the autistic person, because I'm saying always because you masked, always because you hid yourself, kind of almost suggests that it's the autistic person where the problem lies in terms of their autism not being recognised, when actually I think it's more likely to be clinicians and teachers just not doing their homework, just not being imaginative enough to notice autism in females, because they're so kind of head set on this idea that autism is more a male thing. Even if they won't explicitly acknowledge that, I think there is this kind of unconscious bias there anyway. So that's my opinion. So as it says here, most clinicians would identify the point at which, say, an interest in trains starts to meet the definition of a restricted interest, but would they come to this decision so confidently if the interest was more, say, appropriate to the female gender? Say, someone who's obsessed with a particular celebrity, as in my case, when I was obsessed with Kate Winslet, or a girl who's obsessed in babies or whatever, like I was as well. And there's a lot of talk here, this is Francesca Happy's favourite term, diagnostic overshadowing, which is where a clinician or a teacher, say, might stop at one presenting problem and don't go on to consider the autism. So they might, for example, say someone might have OCD, which is a very common kind of what they call comorbidity or coexisting condition in autism, but they don't then delve deeper and think, is there more to this? Because it might just be OCD for some people, but if a person also has all these other problems that cannot be explained just by the OCD, like social difficulties, they should be asking a question, is there more to this? But so often they will stop at the presenting problem, and this tends to happen more in women than in males. So there's that. Just move on now. Yeah, just open the page. Sorry, what am I doing? Yeah, so we got to that, didn't we? Yeah. And then on page 74, the book looks at repetitive behaviours in autism and the so-called lack of imagination, which is quite a kind of problematic term in and of itself, but that's why nowadays it emphasises the social aspect of a lack of imagination, not imagination itself, but the social aspect is what autistic people struggle with, because autistic people can have imagination, just not social imagination. So the repetitive behaviour, the original explanation for this was this lack of imagination, Lorna Wing, the failure to think of anything else to do, to imagine, to come up with other solutions to a problem. Just, you get fixed. I can relate to that, because I do find it really hard to kind of like think of other things to do. So that's one interpretation of a repetitive behaviour. Simply, you can't think of anything else to do, so you just do the same thing over and over again, because, it takes away that thinking, or just, it's all very predictable then. Yes, when I was growing up, I still am very repetitive, because it was most evident when I was a teenager, and I would listen to the same CD on repeat. I listened to Kate Winslet audiobook, The Enchanted Wood, so many times that I actually could say it off by heart. I memorised it off by heart. I could do the accents of her voice, everything. I can memorise it off by heart because I listened to it so many times. The same with certain videos and CDs and nursery rhymes, because I was obsessed with babies as a teenager. Yes, I listened to nursery rhymes on repeat, very loud as well. So yes, can relate to that. And it's also suggested that maybe the repetitive behaviour fills the space that is otherwise normally taken up by social interactions. Because, if you're not socialising, that obviously means you've got more time in your hands to do other things, whereas like a non-autistic person, quite a lot of their time will be spent with other people. If you're autistic, you're not going to be obviously it depends on the autistic person, but many autistic people will have a lot of time where they're kind of more likely to be on their own, and then obviously you have to fill up that time. But recent explanations differ. it is recognised that maybe good repetitive behaviours are actually in themselves motivating and valid. So it's kind of looking at good repetitive behaviours more from an angle, more from a more like positive angle, as opposed to just like pathologising them, because they could actually just be rewarding for the person. And indeed, the repetitive behaviours I engage in can sometimes bring a lot of meaning to my life, but at the same time, they can also be annoying as well. Particularly, I think, as I've developed more self-awareness as I've got older, because when I was a teenager, I basically didn't have any awareness at all when I was a teenager, because I was quite late to develop that awareness. And yeah, when I was a teenager, it didn't really occur to me. In a way, though, that was quite good that I didn't really think, hang on a minute, should I be doing other stuff? This is not good. Me wasting my time just repetitively doing the same thing, because it meant I didn't have that anxiety and kind of like self-blame. Whereas as I've got older, I started to think, I started to be more self-critical, because I've developed more, I think I've internalised more about society and stuff as I've got older. It's also suggested that repetitive behaviours maybe could be a behavioural manifestation of anxiety, as the social world is hard to comprehend. So you do something and, because the more anxious you are as well, maybe the more repetitive you can be in some cases. It can add control to the world, and again, it's to do with this intolerance of uncertainty. Social situations are very uncertain if you can't predict other people's behaviour. So, repetitive behaviours bring that certainty, bring that sense of control. And also, I guess it's argued that repetition may not become boring if habituation to familiar stimuli is reduced in autism, as they've done research to show that both pleasant and unpleasant sensations retain the initial fascination or repellence for longer in autistic people, resulting in both repetitive behaviours and sensory issues. Yep, I can really relate to that. I don't habituate at all. This is like with my sensory issues with regard to noise and stuff. People say, oh, you'll get used to it over time. You just have to get used to it, they say. No, I don't get used to it. In actual fact, what tends to happen is that the longer I'm exposed to an aversive stimuli, the more toxic, the more noxious it becomes, because, I just don't habituate. And so I can relate to that. And I think, again, I can listen sometimes to a song over and over and over again sometimes. But as I say, I've got more aware of it as I've got older, so I try not to do it. But just because, I start to think, how many times am I going to listen to this again and again and again? But I do have this natural desire to kind of sometimes do things on repeat or to do things repetitively. As a teenager, I sometimes, as I say, that's why I memorise stuff off by heart, because I listen to them so many times. So I can definitely relate to that. Yeah, you don't habituate, so it can stay just as interesting. You don't get bored so easily, I think, doing the same thing over and over and over again. But it can work both ways. It can be both positive and negative. Okay, so we're going to move on to video number 2 now.